Hey, good morning. This is Kurt Isles coming to you from the creek bank. And as usual, I'm sitting on the porch at the old house in Dry Creek, Louisiana. It's right at sunset. Sunrise. Sunrise in Dry Creek this morning was at 6:47. It's just a little past that. I've got my lights in my studio set up so things are bright enough you can see me. Most of all, we'll have a good soundtrack this morning. We've got a woodpecker. We've got a lot of crows this morning cutting up, and you'll hear a Carolina wren if you know your birds. So just sit back and relax. We were glad you joined us. In fact, we consider it a privilege that you join us each week here at the Creek Bank. I want to remind you before we get to today's story that you can find everything you ever want to know about our writing, books, and life at creekbank.net. That's creekbank.net. And it will tell you how to get to our YouTube channel, our podcast, our Facebook, and blog, and everything we do. And we hope you'll drop by there and you'll find out more about what's going on at Creek Bank. Today, I want to tell you a story that I would call the art of wearing a bandana. Now, all my life, I've been a person that carries either, have to understand it's early in the morning, I've always been the kind of person that carries a bandana or a handkerchief. And I've always done that. I've watched my teenage grandsons. I've asked them, do you carry a handkerchief? And none of them do. I think, what's wrong why you don't carry a handkerchief? Or in my case, also a bandana. And they'll say they just don't need one. Well, here's what I'm saying, and here's my handkerchief for the day, and here's my bandana. Now, you'll notice people ask me, why do you carry that bandana around your neck? Well, first of all, it's a good place to put my microphone. But also I tell them, well, I might decide to go rob a bank. Or I might decide to fight a woods fire. Or there may be a dust storm come up. There's all kind of uses on a handkerchief or a bandana, and I'm going to tell you about some of them. In fact, you probably have a list yourself. I just believe a man ought to be carrying in his pocket either a handkerchief or a bandana. I'll be honest with you, it's August now in Louisiana. The main way I use my bandana is to wipe sweat off my face. And it's just a good thing to have. And I've always believed that you should carry one where you need it. I could think of all kinds of stories I could tell you, but the story I want to tell you today is what I'd say is it's a sad story about the use of bandana. Once again, in Africa, I usually always carried a bandana as well as a handkerchief because of how hot it was. And Dee Dee and I had been to a meeting up in northern Kenya. And to get there, we'd driven through the Turkana Desert. Northern Kenya it's not like the rest of Kenya, or it's not bush, it's desert. And going through the Turkana Desert, you'll cross dry riverbeds 33 times. In other words, you just drive down through the riverbed. And the road's very rough. In fact, sometimes you wonder where the road's at. And we've been to a meeting up there, and we're on our way back. I'm going to tell you two stories. The first story is we were on our way back, and it's probably a 200-mile drive. And we found out there was the tribe that we were going to drive through their area were having uproar. They were having riots, and they'd been robbing vehicles. And so Dee Dee and I were pretty nervous, and we got to a little town right at the edge of the tribal area. And there in the parking lot of a grocery store, or a store, was just what we were looking for, a military convoy. Now I want to say this, in East Africa, you avoid the police, you definitely avoid the military, because the army will try to bribe you, blackmail you, anything. But Dee Dee and I were in a bind, so I went and I found the officer in charge. I explained the predicament. I said, sir, we're going south towards Nairobi, and we've heard there's a lot of uproar and unrest ahead of us. Could we get in your convoy? He said, sure. So they put us in the middle of this convoy, and we were right on through the area and never had a problem. I always liked going through Turkana because it was just so desolate. You didn't see hardly anything at all. But the story I'm going to tell you now has to do with a bandana I had that day. We were driving along coming south, and all of a sudden we saw to the left side of the road a truck that was turned over, had flipped over. And when we stopped and I looked at it, there was a man laying out between the road and the truck. And I went up to him, and it was very obvious he was dead. And as I watched, you could see what had happened. The guy had run off the road, overcorrected, ran off the other side, and the truck had flipped, had turned over several times. And what happened, evidently, he was ejected, and the truck rolled over on him. And he was dead. There was no doubt he was dead. So we stood there not knowing what to do. Didn't have 911. Didn't even have cell service here. And we knew ambulance wasn't coming. So we just stood there for a while. And in a minute, another vehicle stopped, and they looked at everything. And we got ready to go. It just bothered me that we were leaving a dead man in the desert right there. And I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled out my bandana, and I unrolled it, and I put it over his face. I just felt like it was the one thing I could do to give this guy a little dignity in his death. And so I put that bandana over his face, and we loaded up and went on. And I just can't tell you how much that episode touched my life. One thing we found in East Africa, as you work in South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, you're in and out of war zones, you're in and out of refugee camps, you see a lot of death. It's just part of what you'll see, and you must be prepared for that. At the same time, we saw so much life. We just really saw the very best in people. We saw people give to each other. Amazing thing about the refugee camps, they were in Uganda, and the people that had come to the refugee camps came from South Sudan, which was in the middle of the Civil War, and they showed up by the thousands, even the hundreds of thousands. And the Ugandans, instead of shunning these refugees that crowded everywhere in these camps, they showed hospitality and kindness to them. I asked one of my Ugandan friends, I said, why are y'all being so kind to these South Sudanese? And my friend said, well, it's because we have been refugees. He said, during our war of the LRA, you may have read about the Lord's Resistance Army, which is terrible, nothing to do with the Lord. It was a terrible militia that just raped and murdered throughout northern Uganda. During that time, Ugandans fled into South Sudan to safety. And my friend in Uganda said, they took care of us in South Sudan. Now they have come to us, and we're taking care of them. And I thought about a word that probably in some future episode I'd like to talk about. It's called empathy. Empathy is different from sympathy. Sympathy is a great thing, but empathy is something way down in your heart because you've been through it. And because you've been through it, you want to help others who are going through it. And so I want to encourage you today that you will be an empathetic person, that you'll look for chances to help people who are hurting, especially people who are hurting in the same part of your heart that you've hurt before. Well, it's early morning. We've enjoyed being with you. I hope you've enjoyed our soundtrack behind us, the different birds, and we'll see you next time. As always, at the Creek Bank, we say we'll leave the screen door unlatched for you.